Welcome to SAT Prep Thursday. Today we're doing College Board SAT Practice Test number 5, Part 4, numbers 21 through 38. This is a calculator approved section, so I will be using either a TI-30XS or a TI-30XA. Also, there is a file link in the description for this practice test. In the equation above, if A is negative and B is positive, which of the following must be true? Well, I think a simple way to look at this is with simply positives and negatives. Now, if A is negative, then I would have a negative over a negative. Now, we're then going to be subtracting B as a positive, and a negative times a positive would make that negative. So we'd have negative plus a negative, which would be a negative number on top, divided by a negative number on bottom, which means that would have to be a positive number. So C would have to be positive, meaning A is the answer. In State X, Mr. Camp's 8th grade class, consisting of 26 students, was surveyed, and 34.6% of the students reported that they had at least 2 siblings. The average 8th grade class size in that state is 26. If the students in Mr. Camp's class are representative of students in the state's 8th grade classes, and there are 1,800 8th grade classes in the state, which of the following estimates the number of 8th grade students in the state who have fewer than 2 siblings? So to start with, we're going to deal with the fact of fewer than 2 siblings, meaning out of 100% of the students, if you subtract 34.6 that have 2 or more, that's going to leave you with 65.4% have more than 65.4% have fewer than 2 siblings, meaning they have 1 or none. Now, when it comes to the number of students, we have 1,800 classes times 26 students per class gives us 46,800. If we multiply this by the percent, 65.4, which is 0.654, then we're going to get 30,600, which is C. For questions 23 and 24, we're going to refer to the following information. The Townsend Rally Group invests in 5 different properties listed on this table. The table shows the amount in dollars the company paid for each property and corresponding monthly rental prices in dollars the company charges for the property at each of the 5 locations. The relationship between the monthly rental price, R, in dollars, and the property's purchase price, P, in thousands of dollars, can be represented by a linear function. Which of the following functions represents the relationship? We're going to start by giving ourselves some really simple things to deal with. This is P, and this is R of P. I'm also going to go ahead and cross out all of those zeros because we're talking about in thousands. So R of P is equal to AP plus B. Now we need to figure out what A is, and A gets to be 1310 minus 950 divided by 176 minus 128, meaning A is 7.5. Now, since A is 7.5 and A is really representing the slope, the change that's going on here, if it doesn't have that as the number in front of P, then I go ahead and eliminate it, so D is the answer. Townsend Realty purchased the Glenview Street property and received a 40% discount off the original price, along with an additional 20% off the discounted price for purchasing the property in cash. Which of the following best approximates the original price in dollars of the Glenview Street property? So we know that there's going to be some X dollar of values. Now, they got a 40% discount, which we can see they paid 60% of it. They also got a 20% discount, which means they paid 80% of it. By simplifying this, we can see that we get 0.48x. Now, this is equal to the purchase price that they had, which was $140,000. So X would be equal to $291,666.07, which is closest to B, so B is the answer. A psychologist set up an experiment to study the tendency of persons to select the first item when presented with a series of items. In the experiment, 300 people were presented with a set of 5 pictures arranged in random order. Each person was asked to choose the most appealing picture. Of the first 150 participants, 36 chose the first picture in the set. Among the remaining 150 participants, P people chose the first picture in the set. If more than 20% of all participants chose the first picture in the set, which of the following inequalities best describes the possible values of P? To start with, we know there were 300 people. We also know that 150 participants, 36 chose that first picture. The next 150, P chose that first picture. And we want to know if more than 20% of all participants. So we can set up that 36 plus P divided by its total 300 must be greater than 0.2. So 36 plus P is greater than 0.2 times 300. This gives us that D is the answer. The surface area of a cube is 6 times a over 4 squared, where a is a positive constant. Which of the following gives the perimeter of one face of the cube? So it said this is the surface area here. So the surface area is equal to 6 times the length times the width. And we know that the area of one side is equal to the length times the width. And this is equal to the area over 4 squared. A perimeter is 4 times the side. So the perimeter would be equal to 4 times a over 4, meaning the perimeter would be equal to A, or B is the answer. The mean score of 8 players in a basketball game was 14.5 points. If the highest individual score is removed, the mean score of the remaining 7 players becomes 12 points. What was the highest score? So mean is average, and we know that there are 8 players, and the average was 14 points, meaning that x over 8 would be equal to 14.5. So x is equal to 116. But if y over 7, we remove the highest player, was equal to 12, then y is equal to 84. Now 116 minus 84 would give us 32 points. That was the highest scoring player, so C is the answer. The graph of linear function f is shown in the xy plane above. The slope of the graph of the linear function g is 4 times the slope of the graph of f. If the graph of g passes through the point 0, -4, what is the value of g of 9? First, let's talk about the slope of f. So if I just go to a point where it crosses, like here and here, this means I get to go up 1, right 2, meaning I have a slope of 1 over 2 for my f equation. I can also see that it passes through the y-axis at 3. Meaning I get an f of x is equal to 1/2 x plus 3. Now the slope of g of x is 4 times the slope of f of x. So 4 times 1/2 means that g of x would be equal to 2x plus now some unknown value. But we do know that g passes through 0, 4, which means I can substitute these numbers in. This would give me that g of x is equal to 2x minus 4. Really simply, because remember, this 0, -4 is the y-intercept, which is what b is. Now the question is g of 9. So g of 9 is equal to 2 times 9 minus 4, or 18 minus 4, which is 14, so C is the answer. The equation above defines a circle in the xy plane. What are the coordinates of the center of the circle? To start with, it's important to remember what the formula for a circle is, where we have x minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to r squared, and that h comma k are the center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this equation, adding some things for convenience. The x squared plus 20x, this would be much more convenient for me to deal with if I added 100 to it. So I'm going to have to remember to add 100 to the right side of the equation as well. That's because this is now a perfect square, means I would have x plus 10 squared when simplifying this first two terms. Now the y squared plus 16y, this could use another convenient addition, and I'm going to add 64. That's because it's half of 16 squared. This is also a perfect square, which means I get y plus 8 squared. I add 64 again to the right side, so that negative 20 plus 100 plus 64 would give me a positive 144. Most important is right here I have negative 10, I have negative 8. These are my xy coordinates, so B is the answer. In the equation above, a is a positive constant and the graph of the equation in the xy plane is a parabola. Which of the following is an equivalent form of the equation? Let's just multiply these out, and this is going to give us x squared minus a squared, which is absolutely not the same. If I multiply this out, I get to have x squared minus a, which is the same, so B is the answer. Horsepower and watts are units of measure of power. They are directly proportional such that 5 horsepower equals 3730 watts. How much power in watts is equal to 2 horsepower? So 5 horsepower is equal to 3730. This would mean that 1 horsepower is equal to 746. So 2 horsepower would be equal to 2 times 746, meaning we get 1492. And there's our answer. The painting The Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh is a rectangular shape with a height of 29 inches and a width of 36.25 inches. If the proportion was made where each dimension is 1/3 the corresponding original dimension, what is the height of the reproduction in inches? So when we look at this, really it's very simple. We have a rectangle with a height and width, 29 and 36.25, and I want to downscale it 1/3. So I would simply say 29 times 1/3, and I would get 29/3 inches. Now this figure is not drawn to scale. On PS above, PQ is equal to RS. What is the length of PS? This means that I am dealing with x minus 1 PQ must be equal to RS, which is 3x minus 7. So I get to go solve for x. This is going to give me 2x is equal to 6, or 3 is equal to x. Now, if I'm trying to find the length of this entire thing, PS, 3 minus 1 is 2. Then I have a 3. 3 times 3 is 9. Minus 7 is 2. So 2, 3, and 2 means 7 is the answer. In the xy plane, the point 25 lies on the graph of the function of f. If f of x is k minus x squared, where k is a constant, what is the value of k? This is really very funny because f of x is y, and we already know what x and y is. I have 5 is equal to k minus 2 squared from this equation. 2 squared is 4, so I add it to the other side. 5 plus 4 is 9, and that is the value of k. A landscaper is designing a rectangular garden. The length of the garden is to be 5 feet longer than the width. If the area of the garden will be 104 square feet, what is the length in feet of the garden? So rectangle, width, length, x, and 5 plus x. Now we know the area is equal to length times width, which means I'm dealing with x times 5 plus x. So the area is x squared plus 5x. but the area is 104. This means I have 104 is equal to x squared plus 5x. Let's move all of this to one side so that I can have x squared plus 5x minus 104 is equal to 0. Now, I need two numbers that multiply to make 104, but add to make a 5. This is going to give me 8 and 13. So I can have x squared minus 8x plus 13x minus 104 is equal to 0. Now, these first two terms both have an x in common, giving me x times x minus 8. These two terms both have a 13 in common, giving me 13 times x minus 8. So I get x plus 13 times x minus 8, meaning my answers are either a negative 13 or a positive 8. Now, in this case, a negative answer doesn't help us, so we're going to deal with the positive 8. And we want to know what the length and width is. Well, the width is equal to x, which is 8, and the length is equal to 5 plus x, which is 5 plus 8, or 13. Point P is the center of the circle in the figure above. What is the value of x? So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to connect A to P. And the reason we're going to do this is we create two triangles that are the same. We can see that AB and AC are the same length, and that this center line is itself the same length as itself. Because we bisected angle A, these two triangles we can see are similar triangles. Something we also get to notice is because P to A is a radius, and so is P to B and P to C, meaning what we actually have is a isosceles triangle. This means that these angles right here are both 20 degrees. So if I wanted to figure out what this angle here, P is, P would be equal to 180 degrees minus 20 minus 20, so this is 140 degrees. This other is also 140 degrees. So if we add both of these up, we get that that is 280 degrees. Now we're after angle X. Angle X is 360 degrees minus this 280 degrees, means that angle X is equal to 80 degrees. For questions 37 and 38, we're going to refer to this following information. Ms. Simon drives her car from her house to her workplace every workday morning. The table shows the distance in miles of her average driving speed in miles per hour when there is no traffic delay for each segment of her drive. One morning, Ms. Simon drove directly from her home to her workplace in 24 minutes. What was her average speed in miles per hour during her drive that morning? Well, we're looking at 24 minutes here. This means that she drove the 0.6 segment, the 15.4 segment, and the 1.4 segment to get a total of 17.4 miles. Now, 17.4 miles in 24 minutes, but remember, this is miles per hour they're talking about, so we're going to multiply by 60 to make that conversion. This is going to give us 43.5 miles per hour. If Ms. Simon starts her drive at 6:30 a.m., she can drive at her average driving speed with no traffic delay for each segment of the drive. If she starts her drive at 7 a.m., the travel time for the freeway entrance to the freeway exit increases by 33% due to slower traffic, but the travel time for each of the other two segments of her drive does not change. Based on the table, how many more minutes does Ms. Simon take to drive to her workplace if the start of her drive at 7 a.m. than if she started at 6:30 a.m.? We're going to round this to the nearest minute. So we're really talking about a change that occurs in the second segment, which is 15.4 miles in 50 minutes, which means that we're talking 0.308 hours. Now this 0.308 hours times 60 minutes would give us 18.48 minutes. So 33% of 18.48 would be equal to 6.16 minutes, or 6 minutes.